Il était une fois un designer mexicain venu donner une conférence sur l'identité corporative à Montréal dans sa langue d'origine et a demandé à un interprète de traduire en simultané de l'espagnol mexicain vers le franco-québécois. Au bout d'un moment, le conférencier raconte une blague typiquement mexicaine. Blague que l'interprète traduit comme suit. Bon, là, le gars de Mexique fait son smart, puis vous compte un joke. Fait caster, c'est le temps de rire, OK? I don't want to use subtitles the rest of my conference, so I'm going to switch to English. I'd love to speak in French all the conference, but I don't want to torture you. And I know it's probably time for lunch soon, and we've been learning a lot of interesting things. And I want to wake you up, because obviously after a while we definitely need something. So I brought a rooster. And just to illustrate a point, can you help me singing how the rooster sings in French? So it's cocorico? All together? Cocorico. I've never heard a rooster sing cocorico. I actually heard a rooster sing kikiriki in Spanish. But the funny thing, in English, in theory, it sings coco-doodle-doo. In Chinese, goge gogo. In Turkish, u-uru-u. In Thai, yeki yeki yek. In Filipino, tik-tik-la, okay? It's very hard to say how different things happen in different languages. We definitely have different ways to understand things, to pronounce things, but we all agree when visually we see something. And we can all agree that this is a smile, universal smile. It's so interesting that actually some animals have expressions very similar to humans. Some humans more to others, obviously, right? But the interesting thing is that we've learned about expression. The first thing we see when we're nurtured actually by our mothers is a big face, a big loving face of our mothers. And the expressions, the facial way we communicate with each other is very, very important. And we've learned actually through centuries to express feelings, emotions visually. So we've tried actually to make some sketches to try to capture when someone's angry, when someone's happy. Right now, and here in Montreal, it's amazing all things you guys do, but we actually managed to express these emotions through computers now. You can make different things to make a non-existent face express these feelings. And it's very funny, the emoticons, that we use actually chatting, are also part of communications. When you say something mean, if you put a happy face to it, it means, okay, don't take it serious, okay? You're not stupid, ha ha ha. I'm just joking. So a happy face helps actually to give that sense of nonverbal language. Now, this is not a smile. We all agree, this is just part of a smile. But actually a smile is made out of all these different muscles happening at a different time, right? People who study facial expression can tell, obviously, when a smile is genuine, you can tell these girls are really smiling, and when it's a fake smile. And actually, experts can tell us exactly when two faces that to normal people will be like a smile, it's a fake smile or a genuine smile. Basically because a particular muscle wasn't moved. The number 33, they say, for instance, you cannot move actually voluntarily, so it has to be spontaneous, right? But anyway, we're here to talk about brands and expressions. So forget about smiles, let's get into brands right now. And the interesting thing is, I obviously wanted to talk about expression because a brand is an expression at the end. A brand is something that helps companies communicate in a non-verbal language, right? Obviously aided through many different things. Verbal language is very important also in communications, the way you refer to things, if you speak in a formal manner or a friendly one. But visually, really is how we connect. So if this is a nice laboratory, I would say that we're going to be able to connect through design with the work I'm going to show you, and I'm going to get my point across. So I'm very happy to be here because this is the first time I share my work with Montreal. I've been living here for more than a year now. And I'm very excited actually because I really like Montreal design. Everything that is happening here in terms of creativity, ideas, and I think there's a great symbiosis between design and the rest of the creative world. So now talking about expression, this is actually a logo I did many years ago in New York for a children's books company. They actually published children's book. The name is Golden Books. They needed a brand actually to connect with kids because usually they don't own the things they actually publish. For instance, they don't own The Incredibles. They don't own Mike Wazowski, Monsters, Nemo, all these things. So they wanted actually to connect with kids. It had to be something very tender, right? On the other hand, I had to work actually once with a group of people that wanted to make in Mexico an alliance against piracy. They were fed up selling products and services with pirates in Mexico. So they wanted a brand to convey this idea of piracy is bad for many reasons, business, cultural, etc. So this is a brand about piracy. It's something that is destroyed, actually. You can see the face of the pirate looking at you with the blood coming out of something that means it's proper, it's mine, it's unique. And obviously there are many ways to express through design. When you do a logo, well, you can actually look for coincidences to have a face, being bored and then surprised. Or you can find actually a fisher, an angler, in mountains, rivers, fish. This is for a school of fishing. Or we say in Mexico, ojo, when you want to say watch out. And this is about taking care of water, right? So it's very simple with a logo actually to say something, but you have to know exactly what to say. You have to know exactly if you want to be tender, if you want to be, scary like piracy. Now, sometimes the logo is not the only thing that can say something. Obviously, identity is a system. It's not just the logo. The logo is just the cherry on the cake. You have all the different elements that have to come into play, actually. Many years ago, actually 20 years ago now, I was in charge of creating the identity for Mexicana Airlines, which, by the way, is in deep problems right now. But before they had this identity, this is a well-known symbol. This was very old at the time. It was 75 years old. But they want to express that Mexicana is the airline that takes you places in Mexico, not only for the local market, but for international audience. So the idea was to have a big name, Mexicana, but in details actually have all these different patterns coming from Mexican arts and crafts. This actually like 5 years before British Airways did the same thing with, different paintings and arts from around the world. But the idea was actually to have every single airplane different because in Mexico, the message was we're so diverse that we can actually have all these things happening, flying, in our skies because it's a rich country. This is another identity I did in New York later on, which is for ESPN Grill, that later changed the name to ESPN Zone. But the idea was very simple. How can I represent a restaurant when you can eat and see sports at the same time? The positioning line was play with your food, and this was actually the way to solve it. So when you have the idea of, the two ideas coming together, which in terms of creativity, experts agree on creativity is really putting two things together that before didn't have a connection. When you have a clear idea of food and sports in this case, well, suddenly it happens. This is actually a restaurant in Pittsburgh, and there's one in New York and different places. But the interesting thing is actually sometimes not to find the message, not to develop the brand, but really help the client to see themselves or itself in a different manner. Because really changing identity is changing identity. It's changing a culture, the way they see themselves. It was very funny that this water utility company in New York, Hackensack is the name of the town, water company. Well, there were 40 different utility companies like this that had logos like this, done by engineers. What do you do with water? Well, you pipe it, right? So the logo is a pipeline. And they actually merged 40 different companies in 14 different states, and they needed a new name, a new logo. So the project we worked on was based on the idea of United Water. And it actually had to express two things. Number one, the news about we companies are coming together. And the second news is we are the star of the companies. So this actually 17 years ago, and this was the logo. Trying to tell a story with the symbol, trying to be very clear from the beginning about coming together and being the star. Obviously, in the States, it works very fine with, the stars and stripes culture. It was very tough, actually, to sell the people in charge of doing, the vans and all the vehicle design, that you could actually use a decal. Before it was obviously painting. So, with Scotch paint, you can actually make something that actually, at night looks beautiful with light. So anyway, this was the identity, and the symbol was very, very much, the protagonist of the story. But the interesting thing is that we have to keep looking for ways to express things. When we think of time, we obviously think of representing time like this. But there are many, many ways to represent time. This is a beautiful image that represents time, breaking the sound of the barrier of sound. This is another way to represent time. And if you want to write something, you really have to define if you want to be ephemeral or if you want to be, something that is going to last for future generations. So when you define exactly what essence you want to express, what's the voice that you want to actually convey to your communications, then it's very easy just to get into design after that definition, after defining strategically what you want to say, and doing it. For instance, a photographer, which name is actually Urquiza, Studio Urquiza, it's the name of a photographer in Mexico, very well known, but he wanted to express what they do. A photographer basically works with light, and this is a guy that has a great heart, beautiful heart. He's a very nice person, and he has a great eye. So playing with this idea of drawing with light, we create the identity for Studio Urquiza. So the essence was very simple. Let's communicate through light, just as a photographer does. And obviously the applications play with this darkness where suddenly light appears and happens. Now, another company that does basically creativity, methodology. The name is Lluvia de Ideas in Spanish, which is brainstorming. Lluvia de Ideas, the translation would be pluie des idées. So imagine the ideas coming from the sky, right? Like these droplets of ideas interacting. Creativity is about actually a kinetic expression, something that moves all the time. So the identity shouldn't be just a logo like a rubber stamp placed everywhere. It had to be something really, really fluid and kinetic. So the identity plays with this idea of ideas coming together, interacting. And then through stationery, you would see this happening. In the business card, you would turn it and suddenly the drops, the ideas are interacting, moving, changing already. So when you have a clear name like Lluvia de Ideas, it's very easy to say, let's represent these ideas and the rain. Same thing happens when you have such a clear name as Pastelandia. Pastelandia is like cake land. Gâteau land, if we could say, Gâteauville, peut-être. So when you have a name like Pastelandia, which means we make cakes, you can do something a little bit more metaphoric, more poetic. So in this case, we didn't want to represent just the cake, which obviously is the essence of the thing that you're going to eat. It has to feel sweet already. But it plays with the idea of giving. We realize that whenever there's a cake, there's a celebration going on, at least in Mexico. It's, anniversary is everything is about that. So we wanted to make this flower as the ambassador of the representation of this giving. And obviously this is rendering for everything. For a community foundation, a community is really about bringing people together, inviting people to participate. There was a community foundation called Comunidad, community in Spanish. And the symbol was actually very simple in that sense, because community is about each of us bringing a seed and giving it to the community. When you invite someone to participate in a community foundation, the first thing they think is, oh, they're going to ask me for my credit card number, and monthly they're going to take I don't know how much money. But really it's about giving something that to you is small, but could be very big for the community. So it's a C of comunidad, but also it's an incomplete circle, because we want people to feel that there's a seed missing, and it's your part that is missing here. So the funny thing is, identity is really about connecting things. We've seen great examples of packaging design, and Olivier spoke about actually the need for, in a few seconds, be able to make a decision, grab a product, and complete the sale. In corporate branding, it's completely the opposite, because it has to be a relationship that lasts for many, many years. So you don't want to be very clear at the beginning, because then the day after you're bored already with the message. It has to be somehow like a striptease. You have to tell something to people, and then you have to let people discover something else. So it's okay if before you didn't see something, but when you see the system, then you understand. It's really a continuous experience of things. So we have to think of, what do I want to say, and what do I don't want to say with a business card. I want the business card to tell a story different than the story from a brochure, or from a website, or from visiting a store. The moment you try to say everything in the same, in every communication vehicle, then people get fed up. So with this idea of systematic design, with this idea of creating an identity that is going to tell people just the precise things through time, we were invited to do the identity for the government of Mexico. This was a huge project. This is 4 years ago. The new government, the president we have now, Felipe Calderón, needed a new identity. And this is something that some countries don't understand, because they say, what do you mean? You change the identity of the government every time? It's like you change the identity of the White House every time there's a new president. And yeah, it's funny, but it's the way it happens in Mexico, because the presidency, it's about communicating something particular, new values, new views. Obviously, we took things that exist. This is the emblem of Mexico. We actually developed basically a system, around, the emblem in Mexico. And what we did was, we took the colorfulness of Mexico as the metaphor of things coming together, because this is really Mexico. And when you translate this into the government, you have the presidency of Mexico. This is like the White House. And then you have all the different ministries. In total, 19 ministries. They were divided in 3 groups, which is for cabinet, economical, cultural, and then you have the security one. And each one has a color. The idea was actually to represent this mosaic of governmental entities coming together and representing what the government is doing in each particular site, in each particular ministry. So obviously you can see the president sometimes being, very cultural oriented. This is about education, and this is about being tough, the army. Now, we definitely wanted to have the government one particular voice, and we gave color and imagery and words the responsibility for speaking in a different way through all the different cabinets and all the different ministries. We created a font. Actually, this is a Thai family called Presidencia, which is just for them. So this is very unique. Every time you see in Mexico right now something written in Presidencia, it sounds like the president speaking, which is very important actually to do in branding. And then you have the identity of the different ministries coming together sometimes, because obviously there are efforts where many ministries are coming together. And at some point they wanted, this is like a year after we launched the identity, they wanted to have a symbol to represent the human side of the government. Like everything is coming together. It's not just the ministries doing things. It's about really the government coming together and offering something to you. So we developed actually a symbol that represents the 19 ministries plus the presidency, which is these 20 colors. And the idea is called Vivir Mejor, to live better. Is actually the motto, the name of the program. It's funny, probably you've seen an album, Songs for Tibet, by Sting and different musicians. It was a nightmare because like 3 months after we launched this, there was this album with an extremely similar symbol. And it was sociologically, it was a very interesting thing, because in Mexico, everyone started in blogs and everywhere. We Mexicans always copying something else, and now we ripped off this album from Sting, blah, blah. And we had to say, listen, we actually get to the same conclusion. This happened before, but it was so interesting because we learned about Mexican design actually through this reaction. But really, this is very close to the Tibet idea of a mandala, but it pretends to be very Mexican, very close, like the flexibility of the ministries coming together and you're in the center. So this is actually a new tone of voice that the president can use for different things. It's funny, when we learn about branding, let's say we get a phone call from a possible client, and the client asks us to understand what the brand is about, and we have to learn about the company, competition, and everything is about strategy, learning. And it's overwhelming, really, because when you think in terms of market share, new products, development, suddenly you feel that you have a huge, huge project in your hands. And sometimes problem solving should be much more easy. There's a story about a building. Imagine a building that probably has, I don't know, 10, 15 stories. When they built the building, they had one elevator, right? It was enough, because in the building, families live together. The families with small kids would take the elevator at the same time, right? Well, suddenly families start growing. We obviously move faster nowadays. So the story tells that the elevator at some point wasn't fast enough for the people in the building. So they started complaining with the manager of the building, like, oh, come on, this elevator is too slow. I need to go faster, right? And then families obviously broke up, and probably many, the kids started going at different times. So there was a wait time, and people got extremely frustrated waiting for the elevator, right? So they're putting so much pressure in the manager. Change the elevator, do something to it, right? Complaints every day. He was really worried, because obviously to change an elevator is not a cheap thing to do. So he was talking to a friend who is a psychologist, and the friend told him, don't worry, you don't have to change the elevator. Just put a mirror by the elevator. Problem solved. Because the problem wasn't about getting faster, was about what to do with the time I have in front of the elevator while I wait for it. So this is actually a cheaper solution, much simpler, and sometimes we have to look for those solutions when we're doing identity, when we're creating a logo. And let me tell you the elevator story translated into design. We happened actually to get an invitation in Mexico to do the branding for the bicentennial of Mexico. This year, 2010, actually last September 15, we celebrated this huge party in Mexico, big celebration, because number one, Mexico turned 200 years old, which happened actually in 1810. But also, we celebrated 100 years of revolution, which happened in 1910. So imagine in September trying to celebrate two things: independence, revolution. You can imagine in Mexico, politically it's a nightmare, because obviously you have all these different tendencies. And how do you represent 200 years of revolution, 100 years of independence revolution, and how to represent the Mexico that we are now. It was really a tough thing to do. So in this competition, there were many people representing, the independence with Hidalgo, some of the national heroes, and the eagle, and maybe an animal, I don't know. And what we discovered was we have to be neutral. We have to make a symbol that means nothing or everything. It has to be really inclusive. When you design an identity, when you design a logo, what you're designing is really a container. And the meaning that you put into that symbol is what really is going to be, the product of what people think. It's like the swastika. The swastika before was obviously an emblem to represent happiness, freedom, knowledge, everything. And when Hitler took it, it completely re-signified it. So the solution was basically, okay, we have 200 years of independence. We have 100 years of revolution. And luckily enough, it happens in 210. So there's the symbol. The client loved it. I still remember the face he put when I said, this is the logo. He went like, because he was expecting something maybe that symbolically was going to have, an attack from a different party or whatever. So this is it. Mexico 2010. And if you go now to Mexico, you would see this everywhere still. Throughout the year. This is the president again in the celebration. And everything was about just with color and saying, this is Mexico. And being able to show a photography that could change depending on the meaning you wanted to give. Viva Mexico 2010 was obviously the motto, and then there was like all these different roads and highways related to both independence and revolution at some point. There's actually a car, the Jetta, which was, the 2010 edition, carries the emblem. So I wish I could buy that car and be driving just because I did the logo. It would be wonderful. And actually in the bills, there's the logo in the bills and in coins everywhere. So it's a very, very nice identity system. Let me tell you a story. I was once doing a project in Trinidad and Tobago. It's a country that I had to look in the map to see where I was going because I knew it was, in the Caribbean. I didn't know anything about Trinidad and Tobago. Very, very interesting country. And at the end, well, we ended up working there, this big, nice project. But the funny thing is, I actually came out of my room at the hotel and I saw the newspaper. And I picked it up. Woman escapes serial rapist. I saw the face of this guy. Look at the rapist. Isn't he the worst person you've seen? He's bad. You see this and you want to, hit the newspaper. You want to find him. You want to do something because, this is the worst of people, right? But again, look at the face, my goodness. This is a bad guy. The funny thing, I started reading actually the article, and this is not the rapist. This is the taxi driver who saved the girl from the rapist, right? I hope this guy sued the newspaper for starters. But the lesson here was, wow, this guy looks nice now. He's like an angel now, if you look at him. Look at the expression. So the interesting thing, translating this into branding, is exactly what I was saying. You can do a logo, and you can judge the logo by being, aesthetically pleasing. The typography, beautifully kerned. Everything is perfect, fine. But really, the moment of truth is when this brand is going to do something. And the brand is either going to rape or it's going to save. And that's when the brand starts giving meaning to things, right? I was invited actually this, let's say this year, December last year, by Cohesion, Christian Bourbonnet, France Gay. We met before actually, and they called me and they said, we have a project here in Montreal. Would you be interested? And I'm like, yes, because obviously that's what I want to do, right? It was actually a company that dealt with nutrition for animals, animal nutrition. It's funny, when I saw the logo at the beginning, I didn't see anything related to animals, nutrition, you know. When I started learning, obviously Cohesión did a great job in terms of strategy. It was a solid strategy. It was very simple actually to understand based on that definition. So the first thing we saw actually was that the identity, the logo itself wasn't saying anything about the product, which is animal fed, right? It's about additives. It's about making animals healthier, because at the end we eat animals. It's funny, we feed animals, we eat, you know, the animals later on. It's a circle of life, really. And this identity was really about export and import, if you will. Because at the beginning, the essence of the business, they wanted to say, we export and import products, right? So this is more or less what the company looked like. So these are some of the bags. But again, if you go back to the essence of things, if you forget what the website says for a moment and you really go to the essence of something, you discover that this is what you have to represent. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to be, you know, in charge of making sure you're healthy. And I want to represent somehow, and that was, let's say, the insight that we came up with at Cohesión and Ideograma. We want to represent the responsibility of feeding animals, because it's really a flow of life. It's about giving something to an animal, and then the animal doing something for other animal maybe, and at the end coming back to us. So the logo we did was this one here. Completely different. But it's a symbol that really conveys that flow. It talks about we being part of a circle. It talks about us being actually in charge, but also being at the end the last in the chain, and we have to be responsible for taking care of animals, life, the planet in general. So if you see obviously the applications here, we worked on the symbols to represent the different species. Obviously color coding, and we wanted really this identity to be very expressive. So it's not there yet, but the idea is that the building at some point, the plant in San Jacinto, will be like this, right? So you can actually see it, you know, from the road. So I've been talking here about what we do. I'd love to be able to bring my team from Mexico and say hi to you, but somehow I just did it through this photograph. We're actually a team of 13 people now. I'm the only one in Montreal, but the idea is actually to open an office and start doing, you know, great things in Montreal and Mexico. We're very inspired of being here because this is a great place actually to think, to dream, and to design. And I wanted to share with you just very quickly what Ideograma is about and how our identity reflects who we are. You saw this little dog at the beginning of the presentation. This is like a difficult to translate joke. C'est le temps de rire. Okay? But the implicit joke is that globo, balloon, in Spanish, is the same word that we use for global. So global identity, we wanted to be a global company, and the only way to do it was with a global, right? When we talk about global identity, we talk about not only we want to be in different countries in the world, which probably is too much of a dream, but basically we want to make sure that when an identity lives, it finds its way in the global expression of the company. It's about making sure that the way someone answers the phone makes sense with the way you see a newspaper ad, or the way someone talks actually about the company. So this globality of ideas is about what we are, and the global was a good way to represent it. So this balloon also represents the idea of identity being flexible. So we don't have a dog as our symbol. Basically, we have a green balloon that changes in shape depending on what it has to say. So in a business card, we have a hummingbird because we want to pollinate a relationship. We want to make sure that when I leave a business card, there's some flower is going to bloom, or actually a fruit out of the flower is going to bloom. So it's about pollinating people. So we have a hummingbird. When we need a folder, well, the folder needs to protect and transport, so we have a kangaroo. Everything related to memory, electronic, communications in general through electronics has an elephant because of the memory, the size, capacity. We have a little mouse here. Well, the only client that has received an invoice here in Montreal is Jeffo, Kathy, who is somewhere back there. And she discovered that, an invoice is not something nice. It's probably the worst part of the identity that you want to get, right? Because it's, bothers all the time. It takes some blood out of the company. So we put a little mosquito there, right? Clients want to go like, no, I don't want your invoice, right? And anyway, we use actually the identity to express also the methodology we use. Basically, when we get to a client and they say, what's your methodology? Instead of taking all these different charts of, expressing different things, we take a balloon and we go like, okay, first, we have to see how far you want to go, right? And then we want to learn about you. So it's like putting all this content in the balloon. We want to make sure that we learn from you what your company says, what the market is about, what the competition say. So it's really about content. Then we want to get into conclusions. We want to make sure we put a little knot so nothing escapes. And then after that, we start giving shape to the project. We start probably naming the company. We have to do positioning, strategy. We have to do a logo. We have to do visual identity, obviously imagery, typography, everything. And at the end, what we want to come up with is actually something that has life of its own. When we give you an identity, it's really about something that you have to deal with at the end. If we create the guidelines that are easy to understand, if you really live the identity, it's going to have wings of its own. So this is actually really the product that we want to convey. So this is what we do. This is the way we do it. And I can only say again, merci beaucoup.